Okay, so here we're going to review for our Chapter 4, 4.1 to 4.4 test. And in class, you are going to take a test just reviewing the skills that you need to perform with matrices. So number one, we want to take this number 3 and we want to multiply it by this matrix, -1, -4, 5, 1. When you're multiplying a matrix by a scalar, you just have to take that scalar and distribute it to every term in the matrix. So instead of -1, we're going to have 3 times -1, which is -3. Instead of -4, we're going to have 3 times -4, which is -12. Instead of 5, we'll have 3 times it, 15. And instead of 1, 3 times it is 3. And this is our answer. For number 2, we have two matrices and we want to add them. In order to add them, they have to be the exact same size. So you can confirm that visually. They both look like they have the same exact size. Or you can write out the sizes. This matrix has 2 rows, so it's a 2, and 1 column, it's a 2 by 1. The other matrix still has 2 rows, 2 by 1 column. So since they're the same size, we can add them. When you add or subtract matrices that are the same size, you add the numbers in the rows and columns in the same location. So 4 plus 5 is 9, and -3 plus 0 is -3. A 2 by 1 and a 2 by 1 should always make a 2 by 1. Number 3 is an example of multiplication again. We're going to distribute this -3 to everything inside of this matrix, just like we did before. -3 times -6 is 18. -3 times 1 is -3. For number 4, it's an example of addition again. I'm going to check the sizes. We have a 4 by 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 column. And the same for the other, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 column. As long as that's true, we can go ahead and add the same entries in all the same places. So 3 plus 0 is 3. 3 plus -5 is -2. 4 plus -6 is -2. -2 plus -4 is -6. Moving on to number 4. I'm sorry, number 5. Here we have two matrices that we are trying to subtract. So because we're doing that subtraction, we need to make sure that the matrices are the same size. Visually, I can see that there's 1 row in each of them, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 columns in each of them. So they are both 1 by 4s. We can add them by adding the corresponding parts. So the first entry in each, we have 6, and we are subtracting 4. I have to remember that this is subtraction, not addition. So 6 minus 4 will give me 2. -5 minus 4 will give me -9. And I can write that out just in case I'm not sure. When I'm subtracting, I can add the opposite. The next one is -1 minus -1. And if I write that out, it becomes -1 plus 1, which is 0. And the last one is -6 minus 3, which once again, if I add the opposite, it becomes -9. So that's my last entry. Number 6 is a similar example. It's subtraction. So I'm going to subtract all this the like places. Once again, it's a 1 row and 3 columns, and so is this other one. So I can go ahead and do this operation. So I have 5 minus -2, which will give me, add the opposite, a 7. -2 minus -4, which will give me, add the opposite, 2. And 5 minus 5, which will give me 0. Number 7, same exact scenario as before. It's a 1 by 2, and so is this one. So we can go ahead and perform this operation of subtraction. -2 minus 6 will give me -8. -5 minus -5, if I add the opposite, Negative 5 plus 5 will give me 0. For number 8, I'm going back to that scalar number and I'm multiplying it by an entire matrix. So I just multiply every single individual term by this. If I multiply 4 times 1, I get 4. 4 times negative 5 is negative 20. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 5 is positive 20. All right, numbers 9 and 10. Very similar operations to before. Number 9, we're multiplying everything inside that matrix by the scalar number 2. So if I multiply the first item by 2, I get 0 times 2 is 0. The second one by 2 is 8. And the third one by 2 is 6. All right, number 10. I am adding these two matrices. And I've got to check their size. They both have 2 rows and 1, 2, 3 columns, 2 rows and 3 columns. So I can go ahead and perform the operation. If I add negative 3 and negative 5, I get 2. 3 and negative 1 becomes positive 2. Negative 5 and negative 2 is negative 7. 6 and negative 2 is 4. 1 and negative 2 is negative 1. Negative 3 and negative 4 is negative 7. All right, numbers 11, 12, and 13 are to do with matrix multiplication, which requires us to be pretty organized, as we've talked about in class. When I am going ahead and multiplying number 11, I'm going to check the sizes first. This is a 3 by 2, and this is a 2 by 2, and these two numbers have to match. My result will be a 3 by 2, so that's important to keep in mind. I'm always going to look at the row in the first matrix and the column in the second matrix. That's where I'm going to focus on. So I'm going to keep a little tally down here for myself. If I take row 1, the first thing I'm going to multiply it by is column 1. And I'm going to multiply the first term in each. So negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. And negative 1 times 5 is negative 5. And if I add these together, I get negative 8. So in my answer, in my 3 by 2 answer, so I'm going to leave space for 3 and 2 columns. Row 1, column 1 is negative 8. Now I'm going to move on to row 1, column 2, which will be negative 3 times negative 6, which is 18. Negative 1 times 2, because we're looking at this column now, which is negative 2. And if I add those, 18 minus 2 is 16. It goes in row 1, column 2. Now I'm going to move on to the next row. This negative 6 and 2. It's going to pair up with each of those same columns. Row 1, column 1. Sorry, row 2, column 1, I apologize. Negative 6 times 1 is negative 6. 2 times 5 is 10. Negative 6 plus 10 is 4. And it goes in row 2, column 1. Row 2, column 2. Negative 6 times negative 6 is 36. 2 times 2 is 4. If I add those together, I get 40. And that goes right here. Row 2, column 2. Last but not least, row 3, column 1. 4 times 1 is 4. And 2 times 5 is 10, which gives me 14 for row 3, column 1. And last but not least, row 3, column 2. 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. 2 times 2 is 4. And those turn into negative 20, which goes in that location. Okay, I'm going to perform the same exact operations. I'm going to first of all check. This is a 2 by 3. This is a 3 by 2. These match up and they equal each other. So your answer is going to be a 2 by 2. So I'm going to draw the space for a 2 by 2 now. I'm going to start always with the row in the first one and the column in the second one. Row 1, column 1. Now I've got 3 numbers to multiply. 1 times -5, -1 times -2, 4 times 4. So I have 3 numbers to add up. -5 plus 2 is -3, and -3 plus 16 is 13. And that goes in row 1, column 1. Row 1, column 2. 1 times -1 is -1. -1 times 5 is -5. 4 times -2 is -8. If I add up -1 plus -5 is -6. -6 plus -8 is -14. That's going right up there in row 1, column 2. Now I'm going to move on to the next row. So row 2, column 1. Still start with the first column. 5 times -5 is -25. -5 times -2 is +10. -2 times 4 is -8. If I add these up, -25 and 10 is -15. -15 minus 8 more is -23. So that's going to go in row 2, column 1. And then I'm going to move on to row 2, column 2. 5 times -1 is -5. -5 times 5 is -25. -2 times -2 is +4. If I add these together, -5 minus 25 is -30. -30 plus 4 is -26. And that goes up there. Last but not least, I'm going to do number 13. I'm going to check, first of all, that it will work. So I have 2 rows and 3 columns. And I have 2 rows and 2 columns. Due to the fact that there is not the same number of columns in the first one as there are rows in the second one, these don't match, and this is undefined. That's what the directions on the top said to write. You write undefined or not possible. That's the same thing. All right, last but not least, the determinants. When we're trying to find the determinants of these matrices, we just need to follow the simple formula. So if we were asked to find the determinant of, and I'm going to draw a matrix with letters, A, B, C, D. This is just what we wrote down in class. You would take, sorry, that's a D, A, and multiply it by D, and then subtract B times C. That's the formula. So that's the formula that I'm going to follow right now. If I want the determinant of this one, I'm going to take -1 times 1 minus 5 times -3. -1 times 1 is -1. Minus 5 times -3 is -15. That's the same thing as plus +15. And that equals 14. So that's the answer for number 14. Number 15, it's the same formula. I'm going to take 4 times -3 minus 1 times -5. 4 times -3 is -12. Minus 1 times -5 is -5. So that becomes plus +5. -12 plus +5 is -7. That's the answer for number 15. In number 16, same exact thing. -4 times 5 minus 2 times -4. -4 times 5 is -20. Minus 2 times -4 is -8. That becomes plus +8. And this equals -12. And that's it. If you can do all of those skills without a calculator, you will be more than prepared for tomorrow's test. Good luck.